Em case people aí that speak Portuguese, nós temos tradução de inglês para português. As apresentações vão ser feitas em inglês, mas temos tradução para português. É só ir para o canal de interpretação. Há de estar em baixo, parece um globo, ou naqueles três pontos onde diz mais e seleciona a língua. Obrigado. Sorry. Hi, everyone. I think we can start. So today we'll be looking into basically the investment of export credit agents into the fossil fuel sector and how much of the funding is going to fossil fuels, alternative energies. But we also thought it good to give a context. So we'll start at an African level, looking at the general economics of the continent, what's working, what's our way forward, what's the solutions. And then we'll go to the specifics of the actual funding trends within the energy sector. And then we'll go specifically into Mozambique as a case study. And then, of course, go into details around the local ground situation. So we will start the presentation uh, with Fatel Kaboub. He's a professor of economics in Denison University. He's also president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, involved in the Power Shift Africa initiatives. And I could carry on for another 15, 20 minutes just of all the different amazing things he's involved in. He's been really important in linking up with civil society and supporting a lot of civil society work around the economics, which is always a difficult thing because they always ask, what's the solution? What's the way forward? And having academics that show a path forward is critical and very important for us to show how we can find the right path of development for Africa and all its people. So, Fidel, thank you very much. And please go ahead.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm gonna try to share my screen if you can give me, oh, there you go. I can do that now. Hopefully you're able to see my slides on your end. If you do, I'm gonna go ahead and get started right away. So I'll try to set the scene by presenting some of the key structural issues that we struggle with on the African continent, and I'll argue that this is really what we're trying to talk about is a process of finishing the unfinished business of decolonizing Africa's economic structures. And many of you have seen this image, and it's really, it speaks louder than words, and we'll see with some of the data and some of the arguments that we'll present that this is essentially not just the colonial era, but this is still ongoing to this day. But I use the term, the references to colonialism not as a historical reference, but to illustrate that the specific economic structures that were imposed on the African continent still persist and therefore produce the same effects to this day. So what did colonialism do to Africa economically? Remember that colonialism was not designed for democracy, peace, justice, development, or human rights. Colonialism was non-democratic, violent, hierarchical, abusive, extractive, and you can add the long list of ugly adjectives that go with colonialism. Colonialism imposed three core economic rules that persist to this day. Number one, Africa is supposed to be the place for cheap raw materials for the industrialized world. We still play that role to this day. Number two, we're supposed to be the consumers, not the producers of industrial output and technologies from the industrialized world. We still play that role to this day. And number three, and most importantly, we're supposed to be the place where obsolete technologies, assembly line manufacturing that is no longer needed in the industrialized world is outsourced to us under the label of development, cooperation, job creation, and partnership. But effectively, what it does is that it permanently locks us at the bottom of the hierarchy, at the bottom of the global value chain. And we still play that role to this day. So the three major economic roles that were imposed on us during colonial times still persist and therefore still continue to produce the same effect. So why do we today somehow expect the same colonial structures somehow to produce democracy or peace or justice or development or industrialization or human rights protection? By design, it's impossible for those same economic structures to produce the sustainable development goals, for example. And what we're describing here is a system of intentional economic entrapment. And of course, the extractive industry, and in particular the fossil fuel industry, is the lifeblood of this legacy colonial system that continues to this day, as we'll see. An important message, therefore, is that we cannot decarbonize a system that hasn't been structurally and economically decolonized yet. Similarly, we can't democratize a system or de-dollarize a system that hasn't been structurally and economically decolonized yet. And I'll illustrate with some examples, but I want to focus our attention to the structural deficiencies that we continue to struggle with to this day and that reproduce the extractivist post-colonial systems that we have, including the debt trap. And I start with the high levels of external debt that we have in Africa, country by country and on a continental scale, because in reality, external debt is a serious constraint, but it's actually a symptom of three core economic deficiencies. Number one, energy deficits. Number two, food deficits. And number three, low value added manufacturing deficits. And I'll explain each very briefly, and I'll focus more on the energy side. When we say energy deficits here, I'm including our biggest fossil fuel exporters on the continent, like Nigeria, which until a few months ago imported 100% of its gasoline from international markets and never had energy security. Angola, the second largest exporter of oil on the continent, to this day imports 80% of its fuel from international markets because the system that was put in place is a system that always denied African countries access to the technology and the financing, the technology to look for oil, to drill for oil, and to refine oil. And that's the old energy system we're trying to get rid of. In the new energy system we're trying to put in place, it's the same thing. Even though we have the largest renewable energy for green technologies, we're still denied access to the manufacturing technology to unleash that full potential and the financing to finance renewables at scale. Food deficits, Africa today, according to UNCTAD, imports 85% of its food when less than 100 years ago, we used to be the breadbasket for colonial powers. And that is not by accident. It's the heavy agricultural subsidies that forced our farmers to specialize in producing cash crops rather than the actual food security crops like rice and corn and wheat and so on. So we only specialize in producing coffee, tea, tobacco, bananas and cacao and so on. And that's not for that doesn't actually produce food security. And then finally, the kind of manufacturing base that we were allowed to have is the kind where you have to import the machines, you have to import the fuel to power the factories, you have to import the intermediate components to be assembled with low-cost labor, and we even import the packaging. So we end up with a manufacturing base that produces low value added content for exports, and what we import is high value added content. So no matter how much you double, triple, quadruple your exports with free trade agreements, you're always locked at the bottom of the value chain. And when you have structural trade deficits, we all know that structural trade deficits year after year, decade after decade, they weaken your currency relative to the dollar, relative to the euro. And with the weaker currency, anything we need to import the next morning, food, fuel, medicine, you import it at a higher price. So we literally import inflation in the most sensitive areas of our economy. And as you know, no country can function without food, without fuel, without medical services. And that means the potential for social unrest is always boiling under the surface. And the only defense mechanism that our governments resort to as a band-aid solution is to ask the central bank to continue to borrow dollars and euros to sustain or stabilize the exchange rate and to try as much as possible to subsidize food, to subsidize fuel, to subsidize medical services, to protect the most vulnerable as much as possible. And now this means that this mountain of debt that you're accumulating, the lenders get to impose restrictions in terms of what economic priorities you need to engage in because they're lending you dollars or euros and they want their money back in dollars and euros plus interest. So they will force you to prioritize economic activity that will generate dollars as quickly as possible. And the top of the list item is extractive industries, meaning they will prioritize investments in fossil fuel extraction or mining in general because they want to lock you in the colonial position of providing cheap raw materials and locking you in a system of energy insecurity, food insecurity, and dependency. And that vicious cycle of external debt becomes part of this entrapment. And that is really the decolonization is about undoing these traps. And the only way to do it is by investing in renewable energy sovereignty, food sovereignty and agroecology, and high value added actual industrial policies to allow you to escape the bottom of the value chain, which most of our countries can't do alone. We have to do this as part of South-South cooperation, or at least regional joint industrial policies, joint energy policies, joint agricultural policies at the continental scale, at least at the regional economic community scale. Quick look at the data. This is Africa as a whole, our total exports in 2023. You can eyeball the problem in terms of raw materials exports, low value added manufacturing, and cash crops. And notice the volume. It's $747 billion worth of exports. Now look at Africa's imports, $866 billion. So we have a structural trade deficit on a continental scale, and you can eyeball the content of our imports, wheat and rice and corn as core crops that we import, refined petrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, and other high value added manufacturing. Now, zooming in on Mozambique, I could have shown you my own country, Tunisia, I could have shown you Kenya. It's similar structural issues across the entire continent. Mozambique, the total value of Mozambique's exports in 2023 is $10 billion. Now notice the imports, $19 billion, almost double. And you can again eyeball the composition of the country's exports locked into that colonial position of providing raw materials for the industrialized world. And in terms of imports, highly dependent on refined petrochemicals, on core food items like rice, and high value added manufacturing. The classic economic entrapment persists. The result of this, of course, is the constant depreciation or weakening of the Mozambican metical relative to the US dollar. Notice that this is not a short-term phenomenon, that this is persistent year after year, decade after decade. Now, the flip side of this is the rising level of external debt, which is, I could have shown you this picture for my country, Tunisia, for Egypt, for Morocco, for Kenya, for so many other African countries. The name of the currency will change, the name of the country will change, but the structures remain the same colonial structures. And on a international scale, if you divide the world into global north and global south and net out all global financial transactions, you get that green line, meaning if you take into account exports, imports, remittances from workers, even illicit financial flows, foreign direct investment, all transactions, financial transactions, the net amount, the last data point we have is $2 trillion moving from the global south to the global north, money moving in the wrong direction. And you notice the green line has been accelerating, which means the colonial economic architecture continues to do what it was designed to do, which is extract wealth and resources from the global south to the global north. And the summary of the climate finance picture, because to exit from this, we're talking about climate finance for a just transition, but there can't be no just transition under a colonial system. Remember, colonialism was not designed for just transition or development. Here are the numbers to prove it. You have $2 trillion moving in the wrong direction. Next to it, you have the $300 billion worth of loans, not grants, to be delivered maybe in 10 years from COP29, not even visible on the screen compared to the $2 trillion. Then you have the Green Climate Fund, which last time I checked had about $16 billion on it in it, and then the Loss and Damage Fund, which doesn't even have $1 billion in it. And of course, the profits, the annual profits of the fossil fuel industry operating on the continent. You can't find a single climate fund that can match the annual profits of these multinational corporations, and that is how unserious the world is in terms of financing a just transition, because financing a just transition requires decolonizing economic structures, and that's the conversation we must have if we're serious about the transition. And to zoom in just a little bit before I close on the fossil fuel economic entrapment playbook, which is designed basically to say that Africa shall be drained of its resources, shall remain energy poor, and in a perpetual debt trap. And that's what we need to expose with this kind of research, with today's webinar, with the research that will be presented by my colleagues in a few minutes. And here's step by step what I call the fossil fuel total economic entrapment. Sometimes I get a French accent and I say total economic entrapment instead of total, but you must forgive me for that. So the so-called right to development argument is already hijacked by the fossil fuel industry. They come to our countries and they say, you have the right to development. You're a sovereign nation. You didn't cause the climate crisis, and we're going to help you extract these natural resources, fossil fuels, so you can finance your development. And that's the hijacking process, because it's precisely because we have the right to development that we shouldn't be falling into these traps. So first thing, they ask you to start borrowing up front. To put in money to build an airport in the middle of nowhere, to build infrastructure for them to bring their equipment, and they'll be happy to introduce you to their financiers' friends to lend you the money before you even pump a single drop of oil. You're already in a debt trap. They only want extraction. They don't want to build refineries for you because they don't want energy security. So keep importing fuel, and if you ask for the refining technology, it's systematically denied. Your economy will continue to grow. Population wants higher standards of living. They see oil money. So all of that consumption that is driven now by the infrastructure that you build for schools, for hospitals, for education, all of that, you'll import more fuel. And if you want to create more jobs, and you quote unquote start the process of industrialization, you're locked at the bottom of the value chain, as I explained earlier. So you have to import more fuel to power your factories for assembly line manufacturing. And that means Africa's resources are drained, your energy security is denied, and your finances are in a perpetual debt trap. And again, that's what we need to expose. And to conclude here, in terms of sort of storytelling, in terms of where we are and what needs to be done, you have multinational corporations, governments, and the people as the key players in this process, country after country. The multinationals, they're driven by extraction and profits motivations. They must convince government that they are there to help, to finance development, to create jobs, but they need incentives, they need protection, they need de-risking, they need guarantees. And that's really the subject of our conversation today, that my colleagues will expose these incentives and protections that they insist on. Governments, on the other hand, they have already gutted their administrative planning, strategic planning capacity via austerity measures since the 1980s. We have a complete ideological takeover of market-driven neoliberal ideology as the only alternative. That is, that there is no alternative vision of Margaret Thatcher, the Tina vision. And therefore, they fall into the multinational traps either by choice via corruption or by ignorance because they don't see a plan B, they don't see a way out. And then you have the people. This is where civil society comes in. This is where academia comes in. This is where Our role is to inform, educate, empower, mobilize, organize to push for structural transformation, for the structural decolonization, to show governments that there is a way out of this colonial economic entrapment. And therefore, ignorance, from my perspective, ignorance can be eradicated. Corruption can be exposed and fought, and incompetence and lack of leadership can be replaced. So I'm here to basically encourage all of us to continue to engage on these terms because the power is eventually in our hands. And I'm not trying to say that this is easy. If this was easy, it would have been done already. But because it's not easy, that's why we call it a struggle, and that's why we need all hands on deck. Thank you again for your time and attention, and I look forward to the presentation of the research by my colleagues and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just to, even in the case of Nigeria, it wasn't foreign help or any investment from any country. It was a private Nigerian that put his own money to finally get the
Yes,
refinery. So it didn't come from abroad.
absolutely.
And and Nigeria had many attempts to get funding to get refineries and what wasn't given. And also when the refinery started, they couldn't use Nigerian oil. They actually import from Venezuela and Brazil because the oil is not owned by Nigeria. So this is the model, and Nigeria is a good example of when
Yeah,
you do try it, the barriers and how difficult and how much was sabotaged to prevent Nigeria from
absolutely.
getting that. And so that's something that highlights the system that we have to break. So, and we'll be going into the energy sector now a bit more. So we'll have two people. Our next two presenters will give a presentation one after the other straight away. So Louisa Weber holds a master's in climate change finance and investment and is currently working for Prospectives Climate Research in the Department of Mitigation, Adaptation, and Loss and Damages Finance. She's also been very active for a long while. Even before this, we had cross paths in Friends of the Earth, in Young Friends of the Earth. And it's always good to see such a long history involved in activism. The other presenter is Leia Salvatore. She's a researcher in the School of Law for University of Nottingham, and I think I advise everybody to read her PhD. It's on the legal and policy barriers on phasing out fossil fuels, and Mozambique is a case study, and it highlights investor-state dispute settlement structures and how that can really block and cripple a country's ability to move forward and take away its sovereignty. It is an amazing PhD, and there's some other research she has done, and I think it's really something that is worth a read. Louisa will start with the broader continent level, and then Leah will go into the Mozambique case study. So thank you very much, and go ahead. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks everyone. Alt, yes, okay. So thanks a lot, Fadel, for your fantastic introduction. And please, everyone, if you already have some questions, please drop them in the Q&A box, and we will get to that. But you just don't forget your questions. Already put them in the box now, and we will answer them after the presentations. And now I want to present the research that Leah and Daniel and I have conducted over the last year, basically zooming into two important support schemes for the fossil fuel industry, and also support schemes for that system that Fadel just presented, export finance and investment law. And we discovered some similarities between these two instruments, and we analyzed how they overlap and their joint effects, and also applied these findings to the case of Mozambique. So don't worry if this is the first time you hear of export finance or investment law. We'll get to it and explain it in detail. So I'm going to present on export finance and present major financial flows and trends in export finance to African energy projects. And Lea will then zoom into foreign investor protection schemes and how it affects Mozambique specifically. So what is export finance? Export finance is provided by export credit agencies that are public or also private companies that act on behalf of their governments, and their main purpose is to promote trade and exports. So they provide loans, guarantees, or political risk insurance and equity and other financial products to companies or banks that want to finance exports to countries. And these financial instruments then reduce the risks of doing business abroad. Most of the big export credit agencies are based in global north countries, but there's also big finance coming from China and also from India or South Africa in our database. And export credit agencies have been one of the biggest public financiers of fossil fuel projects. And also without that kind of finance, often fossil fuel projects would not be possible in the first place because, there are big investments, big projects that would otherwise be too risky without that kind of finance. And so we analyzed finance trends from 2013 to 2023 from G20 countries to African energy projects. And if you look at the figure on the left side with the trend over time, you can see that fossil fuel investments or finance dominated until 2020. And the record highs in 2020 were due to major deals being concluded for Mozambique's and Nigeria's gas sector. And then we see a big drop in that following year, which is mainly due to the COVID pandemic and the economic uncertainty surrounding it. And in 2021, there was also the Glasgow Agreement or Glasgow Statement, where many countries pledged to phase out fossil fuel finance and increase support for clean energy finance. And you can see that after this drop, the recovery was actually greener, more finance for renewable energy, but overall at very, very low levels. And what is not reflected in this figure, for instance, is that gas finance is picking up already with, for instance, the big finance agreed by US Exim for Mozambique's gas projects. And so overall, we found 77 billion in US dollars for Africa's energy projects from G20 countries in that time frame. And about half of the finance went to fossil fuel projects and only 11% to renewable energy projects. And zooming into these renewable energy projects, you can see in this map the location of large-scale renewable energy projects. And you can see that it's there are only few examples of large-scale solar and wind, and that is not benefiting all countries, just a selected few. And in our database, we also try to identify decentralized renewable energy projects like mini-grids or solar home systems. And we found that only 3% of the total export finance supported total energy export finance supported such projects. And which is a very, very low share, which actually goes to expanding energy access and decentralized renewable energy production. And I added a little table with some examples of such decentralized renewable energy projects, which kind of demonstrate that export credit agencies have the potential to finance such projects, but it just makes up a tiny sliver in the overall export finance flows. And now looking at finance for fossil fuels, we found that, just to say it again, 50% for fossil fuels, and it's highly geographically concentrated, with Mozambique, Nigeria, and Egypt being the main recipient countries. And Mozambique actually makes up half of all the analyzed fossil fuel finance. And just to also keep that in mind, our analyzed time frame is from 2013 to 2023. So the export finance in our data set supported very young fossil fuel infrastructure. And that underlines that there's a big risk that those main recipient countries are locked into high carbon development pathways, since the required infrastructure has long lifespans, and it's very costly to phase out fossil fuel infrastructure prematurely. And yeah, on that note, just to give a little overview, I hand over to Leah. And Leah, just let me know when I have to click the slides.
All right. Thank you very much, Louisa. And thank you very much as well, Fadel, for your presentation. It was very interesting, quite depressing, but very, very, very interesting to have it all together in one. In one presentation. I've worked a lot with all this, so I really can see how our work is actually going in the same direction. So yes, thank you, Louisa, for the introduction. And as Louisa was saying, the financement of this structure in Africa is inevitably going to lead these countries into what we call infrastructural lock-in, which means that these countries will not be able to phase out this type of infrastructure for the foreseeable future and way beyond the net zero by 2050 mark. So, and with, as Louisa was saying, very high costs. There's another layer of protection with these type of investments, which is the legal protection that is accorded generally to foreign investors. Because on top of the traditional national measures, like, for example, civil or administrative proceedings, foreign investors can also bring claims or can rely on what we call international investment law, right? And there are different types of legal sources through which investors can access these type of protections. So we have broadly international investment agreements. It's a body of treaties that is designed to protect foreign investors and regulate the relationship with the host states, right? Usually they can be signed in between multiple parties, but they are usually bilateral. The majority of them are bilateral in between two countries. And that means that these two countries, they agree to protect each other's investors when they are investing or when they're operating in their territories. And there is a large web of bilateral investment treaties in force today. And they contain a certain type of provisions that protect foreign investors and investors only that are from these countries in which the agreement, between which the agreements have been concluded. We also have national laws, means that states have adopted national laws granting special treatment to foreign investors, and they're usually adopted more in the global. They're usually adopted in the global South countries, because after, as a suggestion from the World Bank back in the 90s, as a system to attract foreign investment. However, there is no really evidence that having this type of added protection to foreign investors does attract more investment. And then lastly, we have also investment contracts. So contracts are, especially in the energy sector, they can be all sorts of concession contracts or PPA, power purchase agreement, or concession exploration contract that are concluded between the host state and the investor. And especially in the global South, and as Fadel was hinting at before, these corporations have enormous turnover and economic power. and we have seen an increase of provisions that are particularly favorable to the investors in these investment contracts that you would not find in contracts where the host state has a bigger economic power, such as, for example, in one of the energy projects in Mozambique, the investor, which in this case is Total, put on the table $20 billion, which is higher than the GDP of Mozambique. So, of course, there is going to be an imbalance in economic power and negotiating power. Next slide, please. So, these international investment agreements, these three legal tools provide for three main types of provisions. I will not go super into detail, but just to give a little bit of an idea of how this system works, because I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with it. So the international investment agreement usually contain provisions against direct or indirect expropriation, provisions against discrimination, so through national treatment and most favored nation treatment. National treatment basically means that foreign investors to be treated equal at the same as national or nationals from third countries, which is the most favored nation. There is also the fair and equitable treatment and umbrella clauses. These protections and guarantees are particularly broad and have been interpreted very widely by these by the arbitration tribunals, and they have been interpreted as guaranteeing a large protections to these investors, especially because they have a very broad, very broad formulation. So, for example, just to give a little bit of an example, for expropriation, so increasingly stringent environmental regulations, right, that can be designed to improve the environmental conditions on a site may be perceived by the investors as indirect expropriation or expropriation if they diminish the profitability of their project, right? So if their project, the measure per se, whether it's environmental or any type of measure, impact the project, they might be, the investors may claim that these measures amount to expropriation or tantamount to the indirect expropriation, and this has already happened in international investment arbitrations, and another provision like fair and equitable treatment, which is very vague. It's really often written like that in old generation treaties, that the investors have to be accorded fair and equitable treatment. For example, tribunals have interpreted it to protect investors' so-called legitimate expectation of a stable legal framework, right? So this really de facto creates significant tension with the state's sovereign right, or let's say duty to regulate in the public interest. So this is just to give you a little bit of an overview. So there are these wide protections that actually can be in tension with the state right to regulate. And when we're looking at national laws, the content vary greatly according to the jurisdiction. They can include wording similar to international investment agreements. And when you are looking at contracts, usually you have ad hoc provisions that are agreed in between the investor and the host state. What is particularly common in contracts, especially with the Global South, and I would say only with the Global South, is stabilization clauses. So those are clauses that are inserted into contract to stabilize either the fiscal regime or the normative regime, the legal regime. That means that for the duration of the contract, the applicable framework or the applicable fiscal rates cannot change, or if they change, have to be compensated, or there are certain different formulas, but basically they are there to stabilize. They can also include other type of provisions that are usually not contained into contracts. And I've seen the increase in provisions that are worded the same way of international investment agreements. Let's say the state protects the investors against direct and indirect expropriation, which is not the typical wording for contract, and it's very vague and broad up to interpretation. What's very important here to maintain is that these systems, they grant access to what we call investor-state dispute settlement. Next, please. Okay, so very briefly, through ISDS, or investor-state dispute settlement, investors, they can sue the government directly into this international investment arbitration when they believe that measures have allegedly violate their standards of treatment or standard protection that has been accorded to them, right? Through either an international investment agreement, through the national law, or even some in some contracts. And what they do is usually they seek compensation, right? They seek compensation for the lost profit. In certain cases, they have also sought and received compensation for lost future and expected revenues. So even with projects that have not started because of the certain types of calculation, notably the DCF, discounted cash flow, these investors are capable also of requesting what they would have earned at the project started. Can you put the next one, please? All right, so there are lots of problems with this system, and that have really raised a lot of concerns, and this system has entered what we call a legitimacy crisis for the last 2 decades. I'm not going to go into that, but it's non-transparent. It only protects investors, and really, the system is made to purely preserve investors' profit. It has no other. This is really what it's made for: is to protect the investment and protect the profit of the investors. Next slide, please. So, in our research with Louisa, in Africa more broadly, of the 50 ECA finance deals that we have reviewed that cover 24 fossil fuel energy projects, 39 deals were covered by an international investment agreement, and 35 deals were covered by an by an international investment agreement with access to ISDS, and this is $31 billion US, or 85% of the covered that are covered by international investment agreements. And I also looked at the national laws, and that extends the access to ISDS, because what is very important here is whether the investors can access investor-state dispute settlement system, and where they can claim billions and billions. We have had claims like Canada is facing a claim for 20 billion for not allowing a gas mega project based on climate concerns. So the project has not even started, and Canada is already facing a $20 billion US claim. Just this is one of the many cases, but just to give you an idea. So through national laws, we have this coverage extended to 7 more transactions, so reaching the total of 95%. This, however, is a very conservative estimate, because the true coverage is likely to be much higher. First of all, because global energy corporations are global in nature, and they have a very wide web of branches and subsidiaries, and they can initiate an ISDS from their subsidiaries wherever they want, where there is an agreement between the two countries that is most favorable to the investor. So literally, it's usually that they can access through different jurisdiction, and they are, I would say, most likely 100% of these deals are covered. And because yes, in this analysis we only looked at the nationalities because the ECAs are bilateral, in this case bilateral flows, right, in between a state and a state in Africa. So we only looked at the international investment agreements that would be applicable to these two. But in reality, through the vast web of subsidiaries and branches, they could access a lot more, many more international investment agreements. This is usually called treaty shopping, and this is without considering the contracts, because we could not make an analysis on the contracts and see what are the provisions in the contracts of all these energy projects, because we simply do not have access to these contracts. Next slide, please. So the main problems of these coverage is that these African states that have started these projects, and they are kind of locked into an institutional lock-in. So first, we have seen that the development of these infrastructures creates an infrastructural lock-in, and this is the second aspect, which is what we refer to as an institutional carbon lock-in. So where the institutional framework, in this case, the legal framework, protects these investments for the duration of the investment, so well beyond 2040, and most of them well beyond 2050, and will provide the investor with a very sharp tool to avoid any type of regulatory change, or this system insulates investors from regulatory change. And so African states that have initiated these projects may also face risk facing large arbitration claims, because here we're talking about the tune of billions-dollar claims in the fossil fuel sector, and so it imposes really substantial financial strain on nations, and just the threat of an ISDS may make a state withdraw, like, for example, a measure, and that happened in countries even like in France, when they started to phase out certain oil projects, and a company threatened to sue France through ISDS, Vermilion in particular, and France simply delayed the phase out of these projects. Next slide, please. So in Mozambique, unfortunately, and this is going to be our forthcoming report, and when it will be out, we will send it to you. It should be out very, very soon. We are finishing it. The situation is very dire, because we have 15 ECAs, so 15 expropriate agencies from the countries that you see in the little table, and there are 10 countries, but there are maybe some countries have more than one ECAs. For example, Japan has different, France as well as different ECAs. They have two, for example. So in between 2013 and 2023, 15 ECAs financed a total of $23.1 billion in loans and guarantees for energy projects in Mozambique. This through 26 deals. All right, same analysis here, almost with the same type of analysis that I've done for Africa. I did it for Mozambique. 98% of the 98% of this amount was disbursed towards fossil fuel projects, in particular 3 projects. Mozambique, 2 projects that are in in the northern region of Cabo Delgado. Mozambique LNG Area 1, that is led by Total, and the floating LNG platform in Coral South, that is led by Eni and ExxonMobil. And sorry, the third one is not Coral South FLNG, but is the Nacala Railway Corridor that is developed to bring coal from the Tete region, to transport coal from the Tete region, which is the region where they have the biggest production of coal in Mozambique. So in contrast, just $106 million, so 0.5% was disbursed to renewable energy projects, despite the very big possibility and opportunity for renewable energy projects in Mozambique. Next slide, please. So of the total disbursed, a majority of it is covered by EL, International Investment Agreement with ISDS, and as I was saying before, still same reasoning applies here. It's still a conservative estimate, and the Nacala Railway Corridor is also covered by the Mozambique National Investment Law, but that national law does not cover the gas mega projects. And the Mozambique LNG and Coral South floating LNG license, that have been licensed through exploration production concession contracts. So I've already published an analysis on these contracts. These contracts have a very long duration, over well beyond 2044, and they might also get some extensions. These contracts provide for ISDS as the sole dispute resolution mechanism, so it's not even going through national courts. there is these contracts afford broad protections to the investors against expropriation, direct and indirect stabilization clause, and all the broad range of expropriation. They also afford in certain cases the same protection to subsidiaries and affiliate and other branches of the same companies, de facto enabling treaty shopping. So literally, the investors and the financier have access to a very broad range of legal sources to access ISDS and bring claims against Mozambique for this project, and they can do it in several ways through international investment agreement, contracts, and even national laws. Next slide, please. So I will conclude with a few thoughts. So this brings a situation of institutional. Can you just give me a sec? Sorry, guys. Sorry, I'm just doing a webinar online. Just 1 minute, thank you. Okay. So they create definitely a case of institutional lock-in, where the legal framework that has been articulated around this project create long-term institutional lock-in for the duration of this project, and they definitely prevent Mozambique from shifting away from fossil fuels and from regulating in the public interest. All right, so literally they are locking de facto in the country into the production of these oil and gas resources, and well beyond the 2050 mark. And another thing that is very, very important to note here is that through this architecture, there is a risk shifting and the wealth extraction from global south to global north, because ECAs are only they're only supporting this project to support the investors abroad. And this is very well even declared in their loans and guarantees documents. It's to support, for example, Exim has written in Japan, it's very clear. We are supporting this, we are giving these loans and these guarantees so that our companies can work there, or can profit from this project, or for example, in the case of Mozambique, because we want a reliable supply of gas to Japan, sorry, in the case of Japan. So there is a national interest. So they are not only giving the loan, but also with the web of legal protection afforded to these projects. They also are shifting the risk. So from them taking the risk as insurers through their guarantees, now if anything happens, the risk is shifted toward on the host states, and no longer the insurer will bear the risk. In fact, in a lot of these international investment agreements, the majority of them under analysis, there are what we call subrogation clauses, and that means that if the investor can the insurer can acquire the rights of the insured, so the company in that case that received the guarantee from the expropriate agency, to start an arbitration case against Mozambique. These are very, very rare and they don't really happen, but that shows the dynamic and the power dynamic in between the home state that really is just benefiting their own companies and their own interests, and how the shift and the risk is shifted onto the host state, which in this case Mozambique, and literally there is an extraction of wealth through these mechanisms. I have finished my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And just to give some numbers as well, the win rate is over 70% in favor of the companies. So these things are very much to the benefit of the companies. And the ECAs have two areas of risk. One is country risk and the other one is project risk. So the country risk is more fixed, and like Mozambique is category 7, very high risk. So then it transfers to the project to mitigate this risks through the contracts, bilaterals, and ISDS, which removes and scrapes away all the possible benefits of the project, which further pushes social stresses, which make the country risk worse, which makes them, so you have this cycle of worsening and worsening and worsening. And the way it's structured is fundamentally a trap hard to get out of. So we have a debt trap, a risk trap, and these traps will keep us stuck in the situation. And the other thing is treaty shopping. For example, using Mozambique and Total, given that there's a bilateral or a contract has favorable partner, that allows them to go pick up any other guarantee or clause that is given to somebody else and use it. In this case, Total registered Mozambique LNG in Dubai because Dubai, United Arab Emirates, has a double taxation agreement. So now they're registered there and avoiding taxes. Just to give you one example, SOMO made a research, and just with withholding tax and dividends, Mozambique is losing over $1 billion because Mozambique charges 20%, whereas Dubai at 0%. They're registered in Dubai, they register themselves in a tax haven in Dubai, and then we lose huge amount of money. So it is in multiple layers that is quite scary how the system is structured. And it goes back to what Fadel has thought about. We haven't decolonized our systems, and that has to be a fundamental step. Now to give a bit of ground reality, because a lot of these projects are supposed to develop us. So a good way to look at it is, okay, let's see where these projects are. What's the social realities? How is these affecting Mozambique? So the next speaker, João Feijó, he's got a PhD in African Studies, and he works as a researcher for OMR, the Rural Observatory. And he's focused a lot on poverty, inequality, and conflict. But for me, also, another thing that I find, like a lot of these researchers are desktop. Fejak goes to the ground. He spends a lot of time. He speaks with the people. And he's somebody that I really admire his integrity and his discipline and the way he interacts with people and the respect he has. And so that is really important. It's somebody that understands the ground reality and gets to the issues. And that is fundamental. Is for me one of the top experts around the conflicts in Mozambique, especially in Cabo Delgado, around what happened after the elections. And that can highlight some of these economic stresses and how they reflect on the ground reality of the people in Mozambique. So it's always good to go back to what's going on the ground after all of this. So Peja, please, and thank you very much for giving us your time.
We can't hear you. I'm not sure if it's only me.
You don't? What's happening?
Yes, we can hear you now. Perfect.
Now we can hear.
Yeah. So I was thank to Danielle very much for so pleasant introduction. I was not ready, and I don't think I deserve so much compliments, but thanks very much for all your sympathy. I will try to understand the post-election protests that we faced in the last trimester of 2024, trying to understand it in the Mozambican political economy. Could you please share the next slide? This is the map of Mozambique, everybody knows. Mozambique is structured since the colonial period in transport corridors or in development corridors, or now some people call it energetic corridors. From these corridors, we can extract the commodities and the raw materials through the railways and the roads until the Indian Ocean harbors, and then export it to the global north. Let's call it like that. So we have the Maputo corridor with gas that comes from Inhambane to South Africa, labor, minerals from South Africa to export. The Beira corridor, we have the pipeline to Zimbabwe, coal, iron, copper, sugar, tobacco, cotton, and so on. The Nacala corridor, the coal, copper, iron, heavy sands, pigeon beans to stabilize the cost of food in India, soybeans, and so on. And Lishinga corridor, we have cotton, precious stones, graphite, coal, and eucalyptus integrated in the carbon markets, and then a fungi gas that it's going to be another enclave economy uh, with few integration with the local population around the project. In the reds, you have the north-south corridor with more than 2,000 kilometers, but with a lot of problems of maintenance. We are calling it a road, but it takes at least 3 days to go to north, and it creates a lot of problems too, because the road is very bad. It's on the opposites, all the other external corridors. Normally, they have funds from international corporations. So this Mozambique is designed, or the Mozambican channel was designed for this extractive and extroverted economy. Can we pass to the next slide? So Mozambique there is geographers now use this concept of sacrificing territory. So it's a place where we can extract these commodities for cheap price to stabilize the costs of energy and food at the global level. So we concentrate all the foreign investment in the rehabilitation of these transport corridors for commodity extraction. There is all this international pressure on lands and mines for mineral resources extraction. So normally it's capital intensive investment. So it means it creates few jobs. And the few jobs that are created are mainly absorbed from people from Maputo or from abroad. So the locals do not have much opportunities, and with tax benefits. Normally in Mozambique, most of these projects have high tax benefits. All these great projects, normally they have an alliance with local elites, guaranteeing their political protection. They can be like the public relations or even partners in the businesses. Normally, when these multinationals and these companies are in competition or in conflict with the local population, the states or the state agents that should be the referee in this project, normally they take the side of the investor. Also, it's the population who could vote and could influence public policies in their favor. The fact is that it's very easy to manipulate the vote, so the government do not need to protect the population. So we have this lack of jobs, increasing poverty, inequalities, and conflicts. Can we see the next map, please? All these projects normally they create this shock absorber. It's integrated in a very complex package. The multinationals have the support of donors and embassies who make state budget support. They finance functionalist programs related with social cohesion of communities, resilience, talking about triple nexus. So they are aware that all these investment creates stress, creates conflict. So they provide some palliative effects, financing this project related with social cohesion. So we don't think about this system of social relations, and we try to promote what the project calls resilience. The UN and humanitarian and development agencies, normally they concentrate humanitarian aid in conflict zones, normally in conflict zones, but political control by the government. which create questions and doubts about the neutrality. The multinational companies, of course, with all the corporate initiatives of social responsibility, with all palliative effect, benefiting a few dozens of local population, generally in connection or integrated with the ruling party. So the extended family of the local leaders affected to the ruling party are the main beneficiaries normally of all this problem, but without structural transformation. And the government, normally they are businessmen, politicians, with partnership with the private sector, with all the discourse of entrepreneurship, vamos trabalhar, which is the nowadays slogan of the government after elections, which means let's work, and trying to eliminate the opposition. And then many civil society organizations, or some civil society organizations that are working in this project financed by donors and embassies, or sometimes by multinationals, working with communities. Like they are communities, they are not communities, they are groups of population historically in conflicts, in competition, in relation to the excess of resources, and implementing this Estamos Juntos, which means we are all together social cohesion projects, reproducing these concepts without a critical sense. So many of these civil society organizations are very professionalized, and they could use their wisdom, they could use their knowledge and their competence to uh, to, to to ask questions to all this social system of inequalities and exploitation, but they prefer to work many times in these projects of social cohesion, facilitating the capital penetration. So this is a very um, complex and wise and intelligent system that allows all this injustice that we have heard in the previous presentations. Can we pass to the next slide? So, but now things change, or at least last elections there was a strong message. The country stayed like 3 months in post electoral protests that literally paralyzed the economy of Mozambique, or at least several parts of Mozambique. And me and my research assistants, we went to see the news and WhatsApp videos that were being shared in social media, in the WhatsApp groups, and we tried to make a database of all those conflicts. Where did they happen in the territory? So we map it, and we have the map of the post-electoral protests, which is somehow the map of the economical map of Mozambique. So we see that the protests were concentrated basically in the urban centers. So Maputo, Beira, Nampula here, Pemba here, Montepuez. I'm not sure if you can see the cursor, but anyway, it's the main cities, the economical corridors, which is Maputo. You can see Beira here in the middle, in the north, Nacala, and this part in Cabo Delgado, the Lixinga corridor. And then the extractive industry zones. We had protests in Palma, in Amanimbir, in Moma, in Moatize, in Inhaçunge, in Inhaçoro, in Chibuto, in Balama. So all were areas of extraction of precious stones, of gas, of graphite, of coal, and so on, heavy sands, and so on. So what does this mean? Can we pass to the next slide? What were the targets of these popular revolts? Mainly, they were party-state facilities, government administration, and Frelimo headquarters. uh, police stations, defense and security force agents, mainly policemen, who were beaten because they were throwing crying grass or they were shooting the police with real bullets, and courts. um, roads, the main transport corridors. Maputo corridor was closed by the protesters. I think it was probably the first time in 100 years that this so powerful economical corridor, this colonial project, was paralyzed by the population. Somehow it was the biggest event of the century, but also Nacala Corridor was stopped. The harbor of Maputo was totally stopped for a few days. The private sector, many multinational facilities were attacked, or around the camp, there were a population with demonstrations. There was even a meeting with the main 19 or 21 multinationals in Maputo that in Mozambique that come to Maputo to meet with the president, complaining about the lack of security during those periods, and then warehouses for food riots, and then humanitarian aid. These humanitarian aids who have this palliative effect of provide some um, few resources with no structural effect, uh, that somehow can alleviate the suffering of the population, but just reproduce all the shame and all the humiliation that this population have. It's very important that among all this territory, there is the very widespread idea that the country is very rich in natural resources, but they do not benefit the population. All this population um, are not so well educated. They didn't study at university. They didn't study political economy or international relations or these finance things at the university, but they have the school of life. They see every day all these wealthy being exported through these corridors, the coal without benefiting the population, the gas to the pipelines, the precious stones do not providing jobs to the local population, with the lack of local benefits, and it creates the sense of revolt. And then they have all the information being spread through WhatsApp, so they are much more informed. They are the majority of the population, and the capital is now in risk. Um, all these big projects are now concerned. There are more and more projects on risk assessment and on security. There is this um, support of Rwanda's troops in some strategic areas of economical extraction. But this will not be sustainable. In the future, the next elections will be in 5 years, and without structural transformations, it's very possible that the conflicts will repeat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So before we go into the questions, just to put in context, Mozambique has around 8% of rural electrification. And in overall, at a national level, we're talking about less than 40% have access to electricity. And so these energy projects are used as a solution to energy poverty, but it all goes to export, because the truth is we already produce enough electricity to have electricity for the whole population, actually 2 to 3 times bigger population. So they use the energy poverty, but they never deal with the actual energy poverty. The reality, unfortunately, is that. And don't forget, this is the country that Mozambique received almost half of all the ECA funding for energy funding. So that tells you We receive them most of the funding. And also when we talk about gas, let's not forget that 80% of our capacity is already hydro. So gas actually there's no transition. We don't have fossil fuel dependency on labor, on GDP, and we already are in a place where the next step is renewables, but what we're getting is going backwards to gas. And that's the reality of the country. And what's interesting here is that when you invest, and these projects are supposed to be Mozambique developments, are where people are the angriest, or where people are revolting. It's the corridors that moving the goods, and it's where these projects are, and not where the rural areas where, because in the rural areas, they're producing around 2/3 of their own food requirements, sometimes even more. And as subsistence-based livelihoods are, they're completely off the grid and not dependent on anything of the government. So they're making a livelihood, even though difficult, even though it stresses. So this is the reality. When you start from the beginning at the African level, then we look at where the money's going and what's happening on the ground. It shows a clear problem here that needs to be changed. So please, it's open. Just want to ask everybody, can we carry on recording? Or if people feel that they're more comfortable asking questions without recording, we can stop the recording. So just raise your hands if anyone has objection of continuing the recording. If all is good, then we'll open the questions to the panelists. And thank you everybody for the patience and making it till here. Thank you.
Yes, it's also possible to write in the Q&A box if you don't want the recording to continue. But yeah, please either raise your hand or write your questions in the Q&A box. And it's also possible to ask your questions in Portuguese. Maybe you can, yeah. Let's see. We have one question on if you can share the slides. We can also circulate the recording and the slides to registered participants.
Yeah, we also have a question from Arman. Do you want me to go or?
Sorry, yeah, my question section wasn't opening. I finally opened. So if the panelists have looked at the questions, let us know who wants to start. Leah, do you want to?
Well, I'm just gonna read first the question because so Arman is talking about renewable energy sovereignty, and is asking whether to attract public and private capital to invest in renewable energy projects, to what extent have the Mozambican authorities started to think about the potential of Article 6.2? So I don't know if any of you has any comment on this. Do you know, Daniel? Or because so basically it's Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement is to pursue cooperation in the implementation of nationally determined contributions. And so in fact the rest of the question is, it has concluded no bilateral agreement under Article 6.2 with Japan, Switzerland, or Singapore, despite its interest in its updated NDC submission. To be honest, I have not. I don't know whether the Mozambique authority has started to look into this. I don't know if you have any idea in the room, if you have any idea about that. I'm also, to be honest, not entirely sure this would be to the benefit of renewable, because what I've seen in the development project for multilateral development bank, including the African Development Bank, and also in the actually Mozambique NDCs, gas is listed as it is described as a transitional fuel that it can make the what was it? Mozambique the first carbon neutral country in Africa or something like that. I mean, the rhetoric is it's quite, yeah, interesting. And even if you look at the financement from the African Development Bank, there are some wording in the financement, because all these gas mega projects in the northern province of Cabo Delgado, which also is undergoing a civil conflict as we speak, since 2017, very violent and deadly conflict. The multilateral development banks and other financial institutions have supported the development of the project through different channels, and especially there have been a lot of operational development assistance going through this project in the form of a technical assistance or so on and so forth. You can find the details on MacTap. And a lot of the justification for this is that it was a transitional fuel. So I'm not too sure to which extent it will go in the direction of renewable energy, but feel free to jump in, Arman, if you.
I'd just like to also just cover some of the first part of the question, in which considering renewable energy sovereignty, the problem of energy security in Mozambique appears to be twofold: the internal energy production of domestic consumption and industry, and replacing lost income from. So in terms of the energy security, the problem with Mozambique is we have a lot of spread out populations, small densities, and that have very weak economic purchase power. So any centralized large-scale project doesn't fit. There's been economic assessments and models that show decentralized, more small scale to be solution, which is not the case. The other thing is a lot of the energy numbers that are coming up in terms of how to deal with how they're dealing with energy access is there's a lot of methodology approaches where they change methodology to increase access. So in a way, with this free connections and broadening just the radius of who can be connected to the system, increase drastically who's considered to have access. Like in Maputo, everybody's considered to have access, even though a lot of people don't have the economic power and sometimes even have the credit machine to purchase, but they're only activated on special moments or important occasions or urgencies. So we've had an increase, and also in terms there've been systems where they're providing solar panels, batteries, and registering that as energy access and all that. So we have to be very careful about what is energy, and we already have capacity to be sovereign. The problem is not, it's who controls it, and these projects are not from Mozambique, and we do not own it or can decide a lot of what's happening. As for Article 6, unfortunately, the fundamentals of Article 6 is to allow business as usual, which means that you're going to allow businesses to continue polluting. It's allowed, and most likely gas companies are going to, the gas investments are the ones going to be using biological offsets and also these offsets to cover their or meet the targets. Also, we've seen it fail in many ways. The actual revenues on the ground, there's some interesting research that's come out highlighting the failure of these projects and the impact it has on the people on the ground. So that's another thing you have to be careful on these, especially red projects and the forest-based ones. There's the other issue as well to realize is markets hasn't favored Africa in general, because the financial approach usually benefits the people that have controlled economics and the finances, and this is what's going to happen. We're going to have a lot of transfer and commodification of nature, and this opens a can of worms that's very concerning. So there is some short-term gains, monetary gains, and the loss is way worse. So Article 6 we see more as a threat to our sovereignty, a threat to allow business as usual and to continue. So I don't see that helping. In terms of bilateral, EU as well has stated the ISDS and tried to remove ISDS from becoming a climate barrier. However, it's still far from being functional or anything that's still we still have a long way to go before we have anything close to something that can work out. As for we also have a question for Fadel from Andrew from Uganda, and we also have and also for Fejar from Attica. Do you want to answer those Fajar, do you want to answer Atticus first, and then I'll pass it to Fidel to answer Andrew's one. Fajar?
Sorry, Daniel, let me read the question
Okay,
first. Okay,
no problem.
can
So,
you
yeah, it's in
translate?
Portuguese and it's in the question section. And Fidel, have you managed to read Andrew's
Uh,
question?
Yes, I'm happy to comment
Okay.
on both on the first question on energy sovereignty because it's related issue.
Okay,
So
perfect.
on the first question, the issue of financing is always part of the entrapment because when investors come in and put dollars into an energy project, they want to extract dollars, which means they want your energy project to be either directly export oriented, which means you produce green electricity or green hydrogen for exports, or they want your green electricity to feed into a green industrial zone, like the green industrial zone in Namibia, which is assembly line manufacturing for products to be exported to Europe, and now those products enter the European market without paying the CBAM tax, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So you end up in an extractive system anyway, and the whole design of this green extractivism is really an inflation management tool for the EU and a trade weapon against the EU competitors who don't have a green industrial zone yet in the global south. So it's not really transformation of anything because the investors put dollars in and they want dollars out. Now, what we want investments in renewables that will produce the energy security for the continent, for countries to deliver to rural communities and beyond, which means the existing financing mechanisms will not work. And that's why I've always pushed for green industrialization that will manufacture the building blocks of development and prosperity, meaning that no country on the African continent can industrialize alone because you don't have economies of scale. Mozambique is too small, Tunisia is too small, every country on the continent is too small. But if you take the SADC region as a block, you have economies of scale for industrialization. You have all the strategic minerals that you need for manufacturing and deploying the renewable energy infrastructure at scale. You have the complementarity of resources and capabilities within the region, and it means that you can actually finance internally within the block the development of industries, an entire value chain that allows you to manufacture the renewable energy infrastructure without external financing because you pay for your labor with domestic currencies, you pay for your raw materials with domestic currencies, and central banks know how to balance exchange rate imbalances between countries within the bloc. Where you need the financing normally is to import the technology, the manufacturing technology. And here you can use your economic and geopolitical weight as a bloc to invite joint venture partners who can contribute in kind with the transfer of technology. So now we're back to the rules of international trade that limit the transfer of technology. And this is really where the battle is for this decolonization is in finding the technological partners who are willing to play by a different set of rules in order to allow for the real industrialization. And once you can manufacture the green infrastructure, whether for transportation or for the energy system, then you start the process of structural transformation. But trying to stick to Article 6 terms, as Danielle said, it's really part of the entrapment. There is no transformation under those rules. And the question about ECOP from the colleague from Uganda, Andrew. I'm very familiar with this case. As a matter of fact, the slide that I presented about economic entrapment, I didn't mention the country, but you can go line by line, and that's exactly what Total has done in Uganda. And my answer is going to be the same. Total's strategy was not to give Uganda or any other country on the continent energy security. They'll never deliver refineries that can actually give you energy security. They want you to import the refined petrochemicals, just like Nigeria did for decades until the Dangote refinery opened recently. So that means you have to work on a plan B. The reason why countries like Uganda and Mozambique and others fall for these traps is not because they don't know that this is not a good deal in the long term. It's because they hope that somehow they'll manage to wiggle themselves out of the trap somehow by receiving oil revenues, and those oil revenues never materialize in the way they imagine. So they end up settling for the same economic entrapment because they have constant pressure for job creation, for energy security, and there's pressure from multinationals to deliver. And this is unfortunately not going to transform the continent, whether it's Uganda or Mozambique or any other country on the continent. Uganda, on the other hand, has the opportunity also in its region to form a regional industrial bloc with its neighbors who also have all the strategic minerals needed for industrialization, to manufacture and deploy its own building blocks and be able to create a plan B to escape from a total trap, to escape from a fossil fuel, the carbon lock-in that we were talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. Can we? Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting question, Vericam. Your first question reminds me of a story. Um, in the late 70s, a journalist asked to the former president, Samora Machel, the first president of Mozambique. The journalist asked him when was the first time he read Karl Marx. And Samora answered that the first time he read Karl Marx, he thought he was reading it for the second time. It means that he learns um, uh, all the political economy of these parts of Africa in his skin. He felt what is the extraction of labor to South Africa to work in the mine because his parents, his father was a miner. He knows what it is to be a low-paid nurse in the colonial system. He knows all the system of exploitation of cheap labor for colonial projects. He was aware of what was the Maputo corridor and all this extraction of labor and of resources to enrich the most powerful, exploiting the most weakers. So all this population, we need more analysis, we need more research, we need more interviews. It is a fact. But something that is very present in the speech, in the discourses of these youth, is that the country is very rich. We have a lot of resources. We have wood, we have these coal mines, we have these gas projects, we have these graphite, we have the precious stones, we have all these resources, timber, and so on. All the foreigners come here and make huge investments. They come, they bring all their 4x4 vehicles, they stay in very fancy restaurants, places that we cannot afford. They know that all the resources do not benefit locals. They know that all the gas do not benefit them. In places where population, in places where there are all these gas reserves, everyone has to use wood. They don't even have electricity at home. Even in Tete, around the Cabora Bassa Dam, the majority of population do not have energy. So they just see energy goes to South Africa. The same as coal from Marara, coal from Moatize. They say everything being exported through these corridors, but without any connection with the local tissue. It doesn't to the economical local tissue. It doesn't create jobs. There is no, there is few local content, and the few that benefit these job opportunities. They come from abroad or come from Maputo, from very far away areas. The school conditions, the education conditions are very weak. We have classes of, I saw classes of 300 children under a tree in the south of Cabo Delgado. The teachers don't receive the extra hours for for years. So the health system is also a nightmare. There is no medicines, and the low-paid nurses. They have to privatize all this public service in order to recover some to get some money. So they have to be corrupt in order to survive because they are under the poverty level as well. So all the population are aware of the weakness of the state, all this fragility of the state. They are aware that all these resources do not benefit them. Also, they didn't study it at school, but they are aware of this. I think during all these post-electoral protests, I think of Venancio, they just, he was Venancio, the opposition leader. Um, he was wise on capitalize all these discontent of all these youth and all these sectors of society. The teachers, the low-paid teachers, the low-paid public servants, the low-paid policemen, all these youth who don't have jobs and who are facing all these social exclusion problems. Your second question, I think the government realized that times changed. I think they are trying to see what they can do. There are some attempts of renegotiate some contracts, for instance, with MoMA, with Canmar in MoMA, but the capacity of negotiation of the state in this context is very low. Because they need investment as soon as possible. They don't have conditions to negotiate, and many times all these investments are in partnership with local important businessmen, which are politicians who belongs to the ruling party, very close to the political bureau of Frelimo or to the political commission of Frelimo. So the president or the party, they need to manage all these different interests inside the party before negotiate with the multinational. So as I tried to present, all these investments are in partnership or in collaboration or with the protection of local big men with politics connection, which is why demonstrating some CIP reports about family relations with economical investments.
Thank you. There's also a question on the Rwandan aspect. I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Sorry?
There
Oh,
is
the
also,
Rwanda.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. What was the question about Rwanda?
They're asking, is Rwanda's presence in Cabo Delgado, is it publicly known what deal is on the table for Rwanda? It's clear that Rwanda aims to be portrayed as a stable power in the region and that Rwandese have received some budget support from the EU. But I struggle to believe that that is all there is to it. So is there, for example, bilateral economic agreement between Total Rwanda or any other benefits or basically what is known at the moment about why they're here, who's paying the bill, what is that agreement, what benefits keep Rwanda here?
That's the $1 billion question. I think no one knows exactly, or a few people knows exactly what was negotiated. Uh, they come to Mozambique, Rwanda come to Mozambique without any information, any clear information. Even the parliament was not informed about the conditions. It seems that now there was an agreement with, I believe, 18 points that were discussed, but only between the two presidents. Uh, Chapo and Kagame. So we don't know exactly what was discussed. There are some rumors that there are issues related with the penetration of Rwanda's capital, with Rwanda's military base. But there is its own rumors. Information that comes under the table, informal information. We don't know what is true and what is not. At the same time, we know that there is this support of the European social funds to health and education projects in Rwanda. So it might be integrated in the typical cynical attitudes from Europe. We do not finance um, we do not support um, uh, uh, we don't support army in armies, but we support through development. But the Rwandese at the same times are giving a favor, protecting economical interests in Mozambique, strategic for European or Western industry in a post-COVID scenario, in a context of competition with China for production of batteries and other equipment. So I would understand it in this global competition between the West and China and the needs of control this strategic area of the globe where there are strategic resources for the development of the global North industry. So um, we have so Mozambique is in this crossroads, is captured in this crossroad with all these international agents protecting their strategic interests.
Yeah, thank you.
And
I
Total,
can,
and I
yeah,
would say Total has capacity of lobby to the French government. This is my personal opinion. I would say that Total has capacity of lobby to the French government that then use their political influence in the European Union to provide all these support that in the end of the day um, uh, benefits the investment.
But yeah, even in Italy, because ENI, for example, ENI, which is the Italian that I know better because I'm Italian, but they are the one that are doing they're the main proponents for a fungi, and they are the one who have proposed the project with ExxonMobil. They are the one who have got the guarantees and loans from the public ECA, so the Public Expropriate Agency that has given the financial guarantees and loans to this project, right? And on top of this, there is also, it's all enmeshed, right? On top of this, there is also bilateral official development assistance, which is a different type of economic source that has been granted from Italy to Mozambique to better manage this project. But this actually, what do they constitute is public debt. So they inflate the public debt because they say, we're going to give you money so that you better manage these projects. And then the government of Mozambique needs to invest and so on and so forth. So it does inflate public debts. So you have all these scenarios, like for example, ENI is very, very powerful and it's 30% publicly owned. So it's very powerful in Italy, for example. On top of this, you also have the legal guarantees to ENI through the contracts and the international investment agreements. So basically, Mozambique is bearing the economic and the risks of this, every type of risk. It's at the end, it ultimately Mozambique is really bearing them to the benefit of Italy, because Italy is not energy independent at all. So Italy wants to protect this project because it wants the gas. Sorry, this is a very important point that I forgot to say. Italy is dependent on Russian gas and is dependent on energetic on everybody because they decide to shut down the nuclear power plants and so on and so forth. So there is a national interest in getting the gas from Mozambique, which is very strongly supported by the government. So there is a national interest, and this is how it then is supported and displayed, and that's how it results in Mozambique.
Yeah, and we, as Fajar said, it's hard to understand what the benefits are. We can talk about some areas where people have looked into and are trying to look into, but it's very difficult. For example, right at the beginning, when the Rwanda's, we found out Rwanda was coming into support, you did see an increase in aid from France to Rwanda. So we're not saying there is a link, but it's something that is good to investigate. The other thing as well is geopolitical trends. Like, for example, Rwanda's the military complex it's developing for Africa as a way of Europe not having to have troops on the ground and work through Rwanda, but also Israel. Africa is one of the biggest markets for Israeli military equipment because most rich countries produce their own. And so Africa is a big market, one of the biggest. Rwanda has a strong relationship, and it's been using some of this technology, and also it is helping politically. Like Mozambique does not have Israeli embassy, and it started to consider Israeli embassy in now recently that has changed due to the genocide, and now that has been put on pause. But before this latest atrocities, Mozambique was considering it for the first time, and so there is these political influences as well. And there's also other subsidized things that people looked into, but it's hard to find concrete evidence. I know that there was one case, the journalist was trying to investigate the subsidized advertising of Rwanda, Visit Rwanda in Europe, because some of the values they're paying and there's subsidized or favorable advertisement, especially with PSG, but we couldn't get information because this information is really difficult to find out. You find something that could indicate something, but it's very hard to understand. So it'll be a complex and a multitude of different benefits. And especially a company like Total and Eni, they have a lot of power and influence over the government. So the governments end up being there's a corporate capture of these political spaces, which they can use as a benefit in other completely unassociated areas. So it's really hard to understand and very difficult and also dangerous. Whenever you start digging into Rwanda, you put yourself at risk. A lot of journalists have stopped investigating these things because they felt threatened or received threats. So that's another problem with Rwanda is when you start digging in, it's one of the highest ratios of journalists dropping this topic I've seen in a while. So that's another problem that's concerning. We have another 5 or 6 minutes left. I know there was one more question that was there, but I think Fajar answering Erika's question also ended up answering Del's question about the people do know. They understand it. They know it from living it. So, and this unfair division of the benefits. So I think that was covered in Erika's response. And yeah, Delsa has put a good point. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Any final comments from the presenters? Okay, I think we've been almost 2 hours, so I'm really grateful that everybody stayed in for 2 hours. It was really good talk. I really appreciate the presenters, the time, and the knowledge and information you gave us. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, we'll have more chances to have more of these discussions. Good luck to everybody. Have a really good rest of the day. And we'll be sending out the recordings, presentations, and the study when ready. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.